Julia Townsend, unofficially from NOAA in the United States of America. I work on marine spatial planning, and I just wanted to mention that I think from listening today that disaster risk reduction offers an opportunity as leverage in the political environment for getting to conservation gains, especially when decision makers are looking at trade-offs. So in an ideal world, maybe conservation wouldn't need other partners and leverage points, but sometimes we do. So I'm just thinking how I can integrate into my work disaster risk reduction as an aspect of marine spatial planning related to protected areas and ecosystem services, and then economic gains as well. When you factor in the economics of the ecosystem services provided, it's another way to trade off why we should be protecting these areas. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And that issue of trade-offs actually reiterates a point that Rachel Kite from the World Bank mentioned at the forum opening this morning. We can't have the ideal world where everything is conserved and we're all happy campers. We have to have, there are going to be trade-offs exactly along those sorts of areas. And can we have those trade-offs that are more win-win? Yes. There it is, thank you.
Right, I am Eladio Fernandez Galeano. I work for the Council of Europe, both on disaster risk reduction and on biodiversity conservation. So this I have to integrate both into my work. But I think that ecosystem service is a very important idea. Why we would need to stress more why we should be caring about disaster risk reduction. The thing is that times are difficult. I don't know. I come from Spain, so I would not insist that now money is the only thing that counts. So we have been trying to sell for a long time, that biodiversity conservation is not a luxury, something very important for the development of countries. It's essential, especially for poor countries. So one of our ways of saying that is that look, by protecting biological diversity in these ecosystem protectors, we are also delivering other services. And the second reason is that disaster risk reduction is going to be done anyway, with or without us. So I mean, when you have major threats, when you countries will defend themselves, from disaster risk reduction. So better, try to promote the greening of disaster risk reduction, so that not everything is again more and more, hard, engineering into what finally into areas that may be very interesting for nature. So I think that's a double need, to influence each other.
Great, thank you very much. I think we should have a drink afterwards. Coming from Ireland, we have sort of similar economic issues and problems and whatever.
Any Greeks around?
But that being said, I'd like to just ask Kaya to react to that, please. Early on in Georgia, you mentioned that primarily the government was working with what I would say concrete walls, in your case, gabions. What made the government change to using more a conservation type option rather than more concrete walls?
First of all, it was very important to identify situation in the country related to natural disasters, like what kind of hazards we have, what kind of risks we have. Then also to evaluate it in an economical way, to evaluate it in money, to show the government how much it costs. Then to calculate how much government is spending for this problem, and then to calculate how much is this money will exist. And that there were some photos in my presentation which were showing that gabions, which costed to the government around 500,000 lari, were washed in 3 or 4 months. And this is like lost amount of money, and we are understanding the situation. Same time we have presented them that there are solutions, long-term solutions, which you can use, and this can contribute to local development, local employment, engagement of the people, understanding of the people that they can do it themselves, they can prevent the situation themselves, and this can be done on local level. This is one of the most important issue in our country, that people always are looking for someone who will come and who will help, and they have to contribute themselves. This was like what we showed the government, and government also somehow agreed, and they are thinking to work in this direction.
So I know that issue of gabions, it's not just in Georgia and Armenia. I know in many countries across Africa whose solution to soil erosion is put up a gabion wall, and a year later I've seen those gabion walls gone at huge cost. And I think what we're starting to look at now, there are other options. They can be conservation friendly, and they can bring benefits to livelihoods and to people, as well as reduce the potential impacts of disasters in the future. They won't eliminate disasters, but they'll reduce the potential impacts. Would anybody else, Mathieu, did you have a comment on that as well?
Oui.
Oui, un commentaire par rapport à l'étude en Afrique de l'Ouest sur l'érosion côtière. On a été d'abord contacté par l'UEMOA, l'Union économique et monétaire ouest-africaine, pour accompagner un programme de lutte contre l'érosion côtière qui contenait surtout des projets de construction d'infrastructures de protection côtière dans des zones urbaines ou dans des zones d'activité économique. La commande était assez différente de ce qu'on a livré finalement à la fin, puisqu'on a eu la possibilité de discuter avec ces acteurs du développement économique et avec les représentants des différents États sur l'intérêt d'avoir une vision globale de l'aménagement des territoires littoraux, pas seulement sur les endroits à risque, mais de façon inclusive, de façon intégrative sur l'ensemble du littoral. Et la prise en compte des écosystèmes, du fonctionnement des systèmes naturels côtiers a été un point très important dans la livraison finale et qui a été validé par les différents ministères. Alors c'était commandé par les ministères de l'Environnement, c'est un programme des ministères de l'Environnement, des ministres de l'Environnement de l'UEMOA, mais c'était quand même des considérations très économistes et très liées à l'urbanisation et aux infrastructures. Au départ, le résultat est qu'on cherche à privilégier dans le plan d'aménagement, dans le schéma d'aménagement du littoral ouest africain, des solutions naturelles et l'entretien des écosystèmes naturels pour réduire les risques. Et ça, c'est quelque chose qui est acté et qui doit être repris et internalisé dans les politiques de développement territorial des 11 pays concernés. Donc, je crois qu'un des éléments très importants, c'est l'argumentaire par rapport à l'utilité de la conservation, à l'utilité de la restauration, et puis l'audience politique qui a pu être gagnée pour des arguments d'environnementalistes auprès des hautes sphères des pays, puisque là on s'adresse directement au gouvernement et on sort un petit peu du monde étroit de la conservation pour s'adresser aux aménagistes du territoire et aux grands acteurs du développement.
Thank you very much, Mathieu. Hilary, just half a second. I would just like to suggest, could I ask, maybe one of our Korean participants might have an experience or two to share. I'm not going to ask you just yet, but maybe just think about it, and maybe somebody from our host country here might have something to share from something that might have happened 10 years ago here in Jeju or on the mainland. Hilary, do you have a comment?
Thank you. My name is Hilary Masindire from Botswana. I might have missed the beginning of the session, I'm sorry for that. But when we talk of disaster reduction, or disaster risk reduction, we could look at it from the perspective of natural hazards will occur, but reducing the impact that they will cause. But sometimes we have disasters arising from our response to natural hazards. And I think as we look at risk reduction, let's also look at how we respond to the hazards. And very often it is that response that becomes a hazard. And in that we are looking at emergency responses, and we may, because we're focusing on emergency responses, may destroy the very livelihood base that we would like the society to live on once we have dealt with the emergencies. So I don't know if the panelists could comment in terms of how we could reduce the risk in terms of a response to natural hazards.
Hilary, just before they respond, I'm a very practical person. Do you have an example that I can push you towards?
I have an example.
Okay.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you so much.
putting Hilary on the... Hilary was the previous chair of CEM a few years back. Yes, please, Karen.
Hello. So one example that I can give is actually after the Sri Lanka tsunami, not Sri Lanka, the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004, where there was a lot of cleaning up of the beaches, so that when the tourists came back to Sri Lanka, they had nice clean beaches. However, in the meantime, the cleaning of the beaches was done in an appropriate way, so that invasive species of some cacti then came in and took over the beaches, which is not really very good for the tourists, right? So that's one example where it's very important that environmental actors work with disaster risk actors and development actors together to figure out these kinds of things. Because the disaster management people don't know about invasive species until they have problems with the tourism board coming to visit them. So that's one important reason why it's important that IUCN and its members engage with such other actors as disaster management actors for both the prevention, but also in the response to disaster events.
Okay, got you off the hot spot there. Does anybody from our host country like to contribute anything? Because this is my first time here in Korea, and I'd really like to hear, has there been any disasters here in the past? And how have we managed them? Anybody like to give me? All being very quiet. Okay, I'd like to hear something. Who else had somebody else's question here? Yes.
Okay. English, French. Ok. Pour moi, c'est par rapport à la question souvent qui se pose aux communautés et aux populations. Elle concerne la nécessité parfois de faire face à un déplacement. Ça pose des problèmes très importants pour les décideurs. On va me demander un exemple. Elle va me dire, donne-moi un exemple. Actuellement, au Sénégal, on parle d'inondations, floodings partout dans la région de Dakar. Et les gens, les communautés, les populations concernées se sont installées dans des zones qui ne doivent pas être construites normalement. Le pouvoir politique a la difficulté aujourd'hui de pouvoir faire face à cela en demandant aux populations de quitter ces lieux pour que ces lieux retournent à leur fonction naturelle, qui est celle d'être des zones de bas-fond humides et qui contribuent à l'équilibre des écosystèmes. Comment gérer cette question politique qui est très difficile? Thank you.
Yeah. Do you want to have an answer? Great.
Non, pas une réponse, mais un autre exemple peut-être. Je peux?
Ok. Yes.
Excusez-moi, je suis Mohamed Lamioul Baba, je suis de l'IUCN, programme Mauritanie. Je voudrais surtout un peu appuyer ce que disait mon collègue Hilary, parce que c'est surtout au niveau de la réponse qu'on doit vraiment être présent en tant qu'organisation et en tant que partenaire mondiaux pour l'environnement. Je donne l'exemple des catastrophes d'inondation qui ont été très, très importantes au niveau de la ville de Saint-Louis, entre Sénégal et Mauritanie, au niveau des frontières. La réponse politique a été tout de suite d'agir pour faire une ouverture au niveau de la côte, de 300 à 400 mètres. Ça a été mécanique, c'était rapide. mais le résultat a été catastrophique. Au bout de 2 ou 3 ans, c'est devenu 2 km, et c'est après tous les écosystèmes au niveau de la RBT qui ont été influencés. C'est un hier, et donc c'est ce mélange d'eau douce au salé qui a été à l'origine de la richesse du milieu qui a été affecté. Donc c'est pour dire qu'effectivement, au niveau de la réponse aux catastrophes, qu'il faut plutôt s'accentuer.
Okay.
Merci.
Thank you. Now we're getting into an area that is also of great interest to us in the DRR community. We've talked a good bit about the importance of the environmental options, the eco options. There's 2 last questions on what Karen talked about. How do we now start persuading our colleagues in the DRR community who are used to resettling people, looking after environmental or war-torn refugees, or are used to putting up a brick wall to protect or as we saw in Georgia, to protect old buildings or rivers? How can we start persuading that community who aren't necessarily environmentalist or conservationist? And many of them talk a very different language to what we're used to talking as more conservationists. Anybody from the panel like to pick up on that challenge for me?
Peut-être juste une réflexion par rapport à ça, c'est très comparable avec ce qui se passe dans le monde de l'urgence humanitaire et avec des démarches qui se sont construites depuis une vingtaine d'années sur ce qu'on appelle la post-urgence, c'est-à-dire la reconstruction. Je pense que dans les zones où il y a eu des conflits, par exemple, où les populations ont été déplacées, on se retrouve avec des situations socio-économiques complètement transformées et il faut reconstruire. Il faut reconstruire un tissu social, il faut reconstruire le fonctionnement des territoires, il faut reconstruire une économie. Et je pense qu'on peut avoir un parallèle à ce niveau-là quand on parle de mettre en œuvre de l'éco-engineering ou des solutions naturelles dans la réduction des risques de catastrophes naturelles. Il y a une question de perspective temporelle à prendre en compte. Il ne faut pas traiter les effets d'un problème, il faut chercher à remonter aux sources du problème. Et peut-être que dans le discours, dans l'argumentaire qu'on doit apporter aux décideurs, il faut faire prendre en compte ces questions-là et les encourager à regarder des solutions sur le long terme, à faire du structurel plutôt que d'avoir des réponses immédiates à des problèmes de risque.
Okay, thank you. Kaya, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that. What Mathieu was saying was that conservation organizations have been out there working on the ground with communities for many years, and to reduce those underlying vulnerabilities, to address those risk factors on the ground. So we have a lot of capacities in terms of environmental management and community vulnerability, an understanding of the community vulnerabilities as well, and we can bring this forward to other the DRR community and the relevant community as well.
So, yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that I found during my studies of communities facing landslides in Nepal is that those communities that already had community forestry organizations, they were the ones who were the most prepared when a disaster occurred. So when there are another, I think, argument, your question is, what are some of the arguments for persuading people in the DRR community? Is that, well, work with environmental organizations or with those communities already that have some basis, some community organizations, often natural resource based, because then they can be easily, I would say, capacity building for DRR can then be easily built with those communities. Another argument is, of course, the multiple benefits, such as Eladio just brought up, that investing in a forest, when it comes down to money, again, we're working with some of the DRR community and policymakers, cost effectiveness, and investing in an ecosystem, in a wetlands and a forest is cost effective. And there are other benefits as well. In other words, it's what we call a no regrets solution. And also, another argument, third argument, is that an ecosystem only looks better over time. It matures, it becomes usually stronger. Whereas what happens with the Gabion Wall, as we saw in Georgia, it needs more maintenance over time. Maybe it's like a good wine, it ages well over time versus a Gabion Wall which does not. So there are three arguments there.
I'm going to be just a little bit of a devil's advocate there, because I've spent quite a bit of time not working in partnership with UNHCR, the United Nations Humanitarian Commission. And their view is that we've got 1,000 refugees coming in every day, we've got to feed them, we've got to house them, we've got to provide cooking fuel wood for them. How do we do it in an environmentally manner? And that environmentally friendly manner. Their first priority, and our first priority, is saving people's lives in that case. And there is a big issue in there. I agree entirely, personally, with a lot of the long-term stuff, but how do we help them with the shorter-term stuff? Said, you had a point.
Yes. My name is Saeed Amouriak. I'm from Jordan, University of Jordan. I'm part of the SCM committee. From academic point of view, I teach my students always, when we talk about ecosystems, to understand